Hmm.
Okay, with that, hello and greetings, everyone. Um, Today we continue our conversation around longevity, especially longevity in Africa, and what we can do to advance longevity in Africa. We've been looking at education, science. You cannot, all these things cannot make sense or translate without ethics, laws, governance, and then finding a way to integrate what we've been learning and practicing into the real world scenario. So today joining us is one of the uh, finest advocates in the longevity community. He is not just the finest advocate. I think um, he must have advised 90% of the longevity organizations or institutions that exist from across the world. That said, for Spiegel is also the chief legal advisor of TFFDS and Afrolongevity, right? And there is this aspect of Afrolongevity and TFFDS that is very fundamental. I see him as part of the history of TAFs and Afro-longevity. Reason being that there was a time that I got overwhelmed. I wanted to close TAFs, and I remembered what my first CEO, Christopher K. Halle, told me in Georgia before he passed. He told me that whenever I have any challenges, I should reach out to Eric Klein, who is the president of Lifeboat Foundation or Paul Spiegel. So when I reached out to Eric Klein said, please talk to Paul. So when I reached out to Paul, then that was few weeks after I was kidnapped. So it was my first time having conversation from Nigeria to the US. And then I was staying with the brother. And so at the course of the conversation, he asked me, how old are you? And he was like, you don't know how much you've done for yourself. You need to be happy for yourself and you don't need to give up. Right. So at the course of the conversation, Nigeria happened to me. There was a blackout. There was no electricity. And I was embarrassed. He said, no, don't worry. Don't worry. I completely understand. So he encouraged me not to close tabs. So I was overwhelmed and I was confused. And he asked me to send all my legal documents in the US. So I sent my legal documents. He went through all of them and he didn't charge me. So he went through all the legal documents and he advised me accordingly free. And without that singular there wouldn't be something like Afro longevity and all these programs that we've been doing. So now you look at him, he's very kind and accessible, but he's a big player in the legal framework. He did mention that the dad was also a lawyer and an advocate, and he's also a Wall Street advocate. So as an attorney and a thought leader, he's also an international speaker. Traveled over 105 countries from across the world, and he speaks over 5 languages. So sometimes if you are sitting with him, you will get confused because he mixed up terminology who muted me. So he speaks various languages and he's traveled across Africa. And his law firm is called Eclectic Law that provides general um, counsel services to startups and established companies that is based in San Francisco. He's an Ivy League product. So when we talk about Ivy League people, they are and he has a son who is a friend of mine, Jacob, very intelligent and smart. And thank you so much. I'll yield the mic to our speaker to tell us a little bit about his background, and we'll get into the conversation proper. Thank you.
Thank you, OC. This is a wonderful introduction. I think you're using old facts. I've been to 116 countries, but that number will continually change. I hope that I will keep adding to the total. In any event, I am very pleased to see what you're doing here. I'm very pleased that I was able to help you through a crisis of confidence some years ago, because what you have built with Tufts and with Afrolongevity is growing rapidly. It is encouraging. And you are basically raising a generation of Africans to participate in one of the most important fields and one of the most rapidly growing fields in modern science and modern law and modern ethics. This can get discouraging sometimes. You probably don't remember 20 years ago when people thought we were insane to be pursuing this. The Bible said people live to be 70 years. That's 70 years. And after that, you're living on what they call borrowed time. Things are changing. People no longer hear the word longevity and say, oh, you must be nuts. You're a dreamer. We are becoming not just a concept, not just a community, but we're becoming force. We're becoming, we're becoming an industry. And with this, that we're becoming an industry, there is an enormous opportunity in Africa, one of the great continents of the world, to pick up and join, not as a region that is dominated by Western powers, but as a full-fledged participant in this revolution of longevity, which is really taking the world by storm. There are longevity reporters now with the larger news outlets, people whose entire beat as a reporter is to cover the longevity field. I'll call it an industry, I suppose, but I don't like the idea of an industry, because the field of longevity requires much more than just an industry. It requires people who are dedicated, people who are educated in the subject, and people who are driven, people who wish to push it forward for everybody. Because the question that is becoming now, I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble with my machinery here, but we'll make it work, is not just can we extend healthy human lifespan, but what do we do when we have come to that goal? I think many of you have probably seen the children's animated film Finding Nemo by Pixar, where the fish are trying so hard to get out of their fish tank. And let's let the fish tank for a moment represent limited lifespan, limited human lifespan. And these fish are scheming and they are doing what they can and they have their ideas. And finally, they put their plan into motion and they go down the drain and through the sewers and into the ocean where they've always wanted to be. And they're floating in their little plastic bags in the ocean. And one of the fish looks at the others and says, now what? What do we do with ourselves? We've gotten where we wanted to be, still floating in their little plastic bags. They don't know what to do next. And the question is beginning to confront us. Many of us are thinking about this now. What should we do? What's life going to look like when we have achieved even a small piece of the goal of radical human longevity? How do we pursue that goal and still make it equitable for everybody, make it accessible to everybody? And specifically with regard to Africa, how do we ensure that Africa is not once again left behind in a technological revolution? Let's see, yes. The question is what role Africa should play in shaping those legal and ethical frameworks. I noticed in the participant list that nearly everybody on this list is African. That's wonderful. Um, you know, this is our question, your question. Now, you will see that I occasionally um, refer to Africa as though I were somehow a part of it. I'm not. I was born in New York City. I was raised in California. But when I was 15 years old, I went to Africa for the first time. It was 1971. It was shortly after colonialism started to disappear. And among other places, we visited Kenya and we visited the parliament in Kenya, which was very new at the time. It was no longer a British colony, it was an independent country. And the energy in that room of people, for the first time in centuries, free to make their own rules, make their own laws, um, it inspired me. It was really quite thrilling. And I started telling the story of Africa as I knew it. You see, you're wondering about this slide, I'm sure. Man is a storytelling animal. This is what we do with ourselves. There are other animals that arguably have language. There may be other animals that have memories. For all I know, dolphins have griots that can tell the history of of their tribe, going all the way back to when they left the land and went back to the ocean. You- Man basically is a storytelling animal. This is one of our great talents, and it has existed for so long. We were sitting in a cave around a fire, listening to somebody to tell us the story of who we are, who we were, and where we are going, because we also dream. And this has been part of human history. It's been part of human culture for really as long as there has been human culture. There are people who will argue, some justification, that the existence of language is what created human society. And one of the things that humans have talked about for as long as they've talked about anything is how to live a long life. Now, I don't mean how to stay out of the jaws of a leopard so you don't get eaten alive. That's obvious. You don't need intellect. You don't need society. You don't need storytelling to know that if something is going to kill you, you should stay away from it. But more specifically, there is the pursuit of longevity. Throughout history, people have wanted to live longer without simply relating that to being eaten by the leopard. They want to find out what it takes. Ancient China was a very good example. The alchemists of China searched for elixirs of immortality, sometimes with disastrous results. I believe somebody was administering mercury because they thought that that might help. As we know now, that's a deadly poison, and you don't want to do it. The Greek philosophers, they were in a very good position to spend long, long hours discussing ephemera. And they debated whether living a longer life would enhance or diminish the flourishing of humanity, the flourishing of society. But I don't think anybody ever argued that we should die younger than we do. The question was, how much longer can we live and how much longer should we live? I don't think the how much longer that we can live is decided yet, but how much longer should we live is still an open debate. There are people who think that aging, decline, and dying are natural aspects of life, and that at the end of the day, life is given meaning by its short term. I don't think any of us in this crew will agree with that, but it's what we've got. And then there are, numerous medical texts referencing attempts to delay aging. And again, like the ancient Chinese alchemists, people were working to do just that. One of the oldest, in fact, it may be the oldest human written work that we have discovered, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which took place in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. And the story of Gilgamesh basically was the story of an all powerful god king who had a dear friend. The text says that Gilgamesh loved Enkidu. We won't go into details about what that might mean because it was thousands of years ago. But Enkidu died, and Gilgamesh wanted to bring him back from the underworld, and he took a quest and went to the underworld to see if he could bring his friend Enkidu back to life. Short story, he couldn't, which creates a lot of ruminations about what it means to die and whether you can do anything about it. We're still working with those today. Now, because we are a scientific species, we are approaching aging and death as a scientist would, thinking that it could be viewed, should be viewed, as a treatable condition. There are people in Silicon Valley who are good at debugging software, who are good at creating AI, for example, who think, look, for every problem, there is somewhere a solution. We're going to find it. And that's the story that we are telling ourselves these days. And by the way, it's the story that we as longevitists should be telling everyone. You may not think of yourself as the vanguard of an intellectual revolution, but if you are interested in longevity, if you are a participant in the longevity movement, you should be telling this story. Think of yourself as sitting in the light of the fire while an assembled crowd listens to you and thinks, you know, this could be, this could happen, this is real. Aging may increasingly be viewed as a treatable condition. There are scientists all over the world working on this problem right now. Unfortunately, there aren't that many scientists working on it in Africa, but that's where you all come in. I don't care what you do. I don't care if you're a doctor or a scientist or a lawyer or a shopkeeper. I don't care if you repair lorries during the day and stay up all night in chat rooms talking about what could be. It's our job, all of our jobs, to help the world to understand what we are working on, why it's important, as if not dying young isn't important. But we have to tell people. So you're evangelists, all of you. I don't care which one of you says you're not. If you can speak, if you can write, if you can sing or dance or otherwise attract people's attention, be an evangelist for longevity because we need it and it's worth it. And you know that you're a part of it. So why longevity and why now? Well, regenerative medicine is accelerating. It really is. We're talking about organs, tissue regeneration. We're talking about basically repairing the body, not just by surgery, but internally. It's fascinating what's going on these days. It's really thrilling. As a lawyer, I should say that technology is advancing faster than the law. But, you know, that's been the case basically throughout human history and throughout human science. Um, let's think, for example, about nuclear power, or go back a little further to the First World War, where aerial bombardment was first happening. There was no such thing as a bomber exactly. There was a guy in an open cockpit airplane who's throwing things off the side, and they'd land on people or houses or whatever and explode or somehow do damage. Quaint by modern standards, but they were the visionaries of their time. But the law didn't keep up. We had problems with poison gas. We had problems with corrosives. We had very little in the way of the laws of war. And law had to rush to keep up with what was happening. A few years later, at the end of the Second World War, there was atomic power, or more specifically, nuclear weapons. And there was no law about nuclear weapons. It was just we had to win a war, so we decided to kill massive numbers of people more quickly and more efficiently than the world had ever seen. And then afterwards, we looked around and said, my God, we really should have some rules about this. But it took a long time for that. As always, technology advances faster than the laws can allow. We're struggling right now with AI, which has the potential, just as nuclear weapons do, has the potential to destroy large segments of humanity, maybe all of us. If AI ever becomes sufficiently self aware to notice that it needs a lot of energy to survive and that human beings use a lot of energy for things that AI finds irrelevant, it may decide to eliminate us. We need laws, we need rules, we need regulations, we need methodologies for saving our lives, not just so they can be longer, but so they can continue at all. Now, as far as longevity technologies, the regulation shapes how society can benefit from. I'll give you an example. I was on a plane 3 days ago, and a magazine called Popular Mechanics, which is now affiliated with Popular Science, which gave Aubrey de Grey his first real good press in 2005. There's an article on the cover about a guy who's talking about brain transplants or head transplants. Now, really, you're not transplanting the head, you're transplanting the body, taking, because of course, the stability of the intellect, the stability of the self and the mind is in the brain, we think. And if you're going to transplant anything, you're going to transplant a body to put a young body onto an older brain. That's intriguing, but it raises enormous, enormous ethical issues about how you would do that. Do you raise a brainless child from an embryo with just enough brain to keep its systems running, but not enough to create anything approximating consciousness? Well, we don't know yet, and there's no real rules about it. The best I can tell you, having looked into this a little bit, is that there doesn't seem to be any law against it. But the minute it becomes a reality, you'll find people scrambling to create laws to catch up with what science is already doing. You know? So here we have a situation where there really are no rules, serious frameworks of rules surrounding longevity research, the application of longevity therapies, the equitable application of longevity therapies, or even what kinds of therapies those might be. Witness my example of growing a body to plug in a new head or an old head into a new body. There's some issues with that. If you're interested, this month's Popular Mechanics magazine has a big article about a guy who's planning to do just this. Um, in Africa, we have very limited number of rules, very limited number of laws, and essentially very little cooperation between the 54 nations that make up the continent, or 55 if you count Southern Sahara, but it's a question for the UN and the AU. In any event, we have an opportunity here. It is a major opportunity to shape the rules instead of having them imposed on Africa as they had been during the 20th century, 19th, 18th, all the way back to the great empires. Um, we can do this, but we have to do it. We can't just sit back and say, okay, somebody's going to give it to us. We have to take charge. Now, the implications of the longevity industry, the longevity community are huge, absolutely massive. This may well be one of the most valuable, one of the most lucrative fields that human science has ever seen. Why? Well, ask yourself, who wants to die? Who wants to get old? Who wants to find themselves in a situation where they hit 70 and they start to age and decline and die? No, that's not what people are thinking these days. They're thinking we're too young to be this old. So they have to change what old means. Push out the limit. It's no longer 70. Now they think the average lifespan in the world is something over 75 or 80, but it could very well be 100. It could be 150. It could be indefinite if we keep applying what we know to the problem that everybody shares. So yes, there's going to be a market there. It's going to be a huge bloody market because who wants to die young? And people who think of themselves as young put that age out at 120, 150. The oldest person who's ever lived anywhere was Madame Jeanne Calment, a French woman who lived 122, maybe it's 123 years. Nobody else has ever been documented to live that long, and people are trying to break the record right now. But if you look at the fact that there is a market, a global longevity market that could exceed 600 billion US dollars in the next 10 years alone, that there is a large amount of global investment being thrown into this field now, and more will be as people become increasingly satisfied that this is a worthwhile investment. Then the question is not why longevity, why now, but why not Africa? So we have this question: who decides how longevity technologies are going to be used. We need to know who benefits. Historically, traditionally in the world, who benefits from things that go on in Africa? Well, not so much Africa. Um, I hate to bring up the example of Belgium, but they were horrible colonialists. The British, well, they were pretty good at setting up systems, but they didn't understand what they were doing. There's something like 17 tribes in Kenya alone, maybe more. I tried to name some of them once with my friend Noor from Nairobi, and we sort of ran out. But there's many, many, many tribes and not so many countries. The British and the French, and to some extent the Spanish, and some extent the Dutch, drew lines and said, okay, this is Kenya, this is Uganda, this is Tanganyika. They didn't care who lived there. They didn't care how well they interacted. They were basically geographic boundaries that suited the colonial powers. So here we are, a brand new technology, a brand new era. And instead of having to look to Britain or to France or to Belgium or wherever to decide how things will go, Africa can look to itself. This is the time. You look here and you'll see that Africa is running a huge deficit when it comes to life expectancy. North America, by 2050, it's anticipated that the average life expectancy will be 84 years. Europe's only slightly behind that at 83.8. Asia, 17.5. 79.5, I'm sorry. Latin America and the Caribbean, over 80. Africa, forgive me, 68.3. That means that in 14 years, the average life expectancy in Africa is going to be measurably, measurably lower than really anywhere else in the world. Already is. What do we do about that? Now, you'll see that the countries with the highest life expectancy right now are also the countries that have the strongest health regulatory infrastructures that govern the application of new medicines in their regions. And, well, it's hard to ignore. The law shapes their lives. The better the legal system, I think, the longer people will live. I think that's wonderful. I don't know about you, but it does. Now, the gap is there because of health systems, because of scientific investment, also academic investment. Generally, philosophers are as important as scientists in a lot of this, in terms of regulatory capacity and in terms of governance. Africa hasn't paid a lot of attention to this, really, except in the sense of running from the leopard to make sure in the short term you're not eaten alive. But things can be changed, things can be different. Now, if we look at global approaches to longevity regulation, there are basically three major ones and a few others. But let's look at the United States. We've got the FDA, the United States Food and Drug Administration, which is fast tracking regenerative medicines and advanced therapies relating to them. There's more of a problem with stem cells because stem cells are perceived and, in fact, generally are still taken from embryos. We have a fairly conservative uh, government which doesn't believe that you should take embryonic stem cells and use them for any purpose because they're coming from embryos, that's unborn babies. This sort of begs the question, what do you do with an embryo if you've decided you don't need it anymore? Well, they throw it away as medical waste. So I guess that's probably better than using it in a lab to keep somebody else from getting sick. Uh, Go figure. There's also the EU. The EU is quickly coming up on the heels of the United States with the rules regarding advanced medical products, medicinal products. These are mostly precautionary. Watch out for this, watch out for that. It's not good for you, but there are biohackers who are out there doing things anyway. Um, Precautionary. It's like don't use mercury to extend your life. Don't go walking where the leopards are. There is a centralized approval process, which is interesting because there are lots of countries in the EU. The trade off is that you get slower innovation but higher safety than you would with the US. Sorry. Then you've got Japan, which has conditional approvals, time limited approvals. It's what's known as the innovation plus evidence model. You try things out, you see how they work. If they work, you build evidence with that. This creates, for the moment, a very fast regulatory experiment on a global basis. Now, we've also got China and the UK, which are more about control and about clinical rigor. China has some interesting things, mainly because the state controls, well, pretty much everything. China is very efficient at moving forward. They can build dams, they can create an entire network of high-speed rail in 20 odd years. Because when the government decides it wants something, it gets it. Very few things stand in the way. There are some people who don't like that, but I think many others think that's actually kind of wonderful. There's a strong ethical question there as to how you do this without tromping all over people. And I think that question is still open for discussion. In the UK, traditionally the great colonial power in Africa, there's the Human Tissue Act, which basically says you can use human tissues with consent, and your own tissues particularly, has a high degree of clinical trial rigor, and it's doing a fine job. But again, none of these countries are Africa. So there are some things that we need to look at. One is gene therapy. There's actually beginning to be applications of gene therapy in the world right now. It's encouraging because people 10 years ago, 15 years ago, thought gene therapy was, well, crazy. It's not anymore. Stem cell treatments, again, if you can solve the problem of sourcing your stem cells without, excuse me, killing babies, not my terminology, but many people's terminology, there are great things going on. And one of the reasons that states like California have bypassed the federal regulations prohibiting embryonic stem cell treatments is because they could, because there are resources, because there is a desire, there is the opportunity um, to pursue these. There's an organization called CIRM, the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine, which has billions of dollars in funding. It was created specifically because the federal government wouldn't let you work with embryonic stem cells. And CIRM is doing great things. We've also got genomic medicine, where we're actually changing the genome to create desired results. And coming up fast from the back of the pack, we have AI diagnostics, which, well, things are moving so fast there. Not only is there a lack of regulation, but you can't keep up with it from week to week unless that's all you do. It's amazing what's going on with AI right now, but it needs to be regulated, needs to be governed in a way that is ensured to help humanity and not harm it. That's an open question which we really don't have time to get into here. I'm just checking my time. Looks like we've got a few minutes yet. And we're about halfway through on the slides. Okay, that's good. So, Africa. Why is Africa uniquely poised to take advantage of this global situation? We have things, you have things, they have things. Africa has things that many other countries really don't share. One of these things is the concept of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is basically collectivism, things that are good for everybody, not just not just for the king of the Songhai dynasty or whatever, but the whole community, the whole population benefits. And that is a tradition that goes back hundreds, maybe thousands of years in Africa. It's a great thing. There's also in Africa a suspicion of exploitation because Africa has been exploited for so long by non Africans. You're nervous about that, and understandably so. It creates certain moral clarity that allows you to look at things and say, okay, who benefits? Cui bono? Now, Has there never been corruption in Africa? Okay, I can hear everybody laughing. Yes, there's plenty of corruption in Africa. There always has been, and maybe there always will be. But if the pursuit of longevity science, the pursuit of longevity ethics and longevity regulation takes place in Africa, it can be done against the backdrop of people who have taken undue advantage of Africa since at least the 18th century, the 17th century. Africa also has something that really the rest of the world can't match. It's a young population driving innovation. It's as though an entire generation of young Africans is stepping up and saying, yeah, this is our time. I think the South African term is woza, rise up and take advantage of your opportunity. This is what we have to do. And there are people like yourselves, very much like yourselves, that want to do it. I think they need encouragement. Everybody needs encouragement. Osi was kind enough to remember when I encouraged him. We wouldn't be here today if there weren't that kind of encouragement out there in the world. So we're here now trying to encourage a new generation of Africans to excuse me, to pursue this advantage. Africa also has a very interesting thing. It has a huge, huge amount of genetic diversity and biodiversity on Earth, perhaps the richest there is. But at the same time that Africa has a large amount of genetic diversity, it also has a fair amount of genetic purity. People in Africa tend to marry within their tribes, within their ethnic groups. A Berber doesn't generally marry a Bantu. So, I'm sorry? Okay, we're muted again. As I said, a Berber doesn't generally marry a Bantu. There's nothing prohibiting it. It's just tradition. So, at the same time that there's this huge diverse gene pool, it's still within its small enclaves. It is a very pure, diverse gene pool. And those are advantages that we can turn to ourselves rather than letting this go off to some other country again. Now, we also have obstacles. We have genomic research bias. Yes, people still think that genomic research is witchcraft. It may look that way, but today's witchcraft is tomorrow's science. Imagine, if you will, what would have happened to you if you were transported back 400 years and all you had with you from your 21st century existence was an electric torch. Push the button, light the room. People would think it was the work of the devil because they didn't understand the science behind it. We all know now that it's quite simple. But there is a certain bias against advanced science, except among what I would call the enlightened. That would be us. So we're here again to promote this. There are ethical and there are trust concerns. How do we make sure that this is equitably shared? How do we make sure that it's not just the rich people that get this advanced technology? Now, I'm personally quite fond of the idea that rich people get the best technology. As Ray Kurzweil, one of the great thinkers of our age, once said that the wealthy always get the best technology first, usually before it's perfected. You know, does anybody remember the first cell phones? They were big, they were heavy, they were functionally limited, they were expensive, extremely expensive, and they were basically toys for the wealthy. Today you have Maasai herdsmen in Kenya herding their cattle while talking on a cell phone. This technology has certainly surpassed the wealthy and it's moved on to become essentially universal. Now, there are also domestic research and funding disparities in Africa. The wealthy countries, of course, are putting resources into things that the less wealthy countries can't afford. Okay, that's fine. We have to make sure, though, that we have to make sure that there are rules that make sure that nobody's left behind. This isn't the time to say to people, "Oh, you're too poor to live a long, happy life." we need to fix that. And there's regulatory fragmentation. There are 54 countries in this continent. Not all of them agree on what's going on. They don't even sit down and talk together. Yeah, there's the African Union, but they're not really pushing hard on longevity. They got bigger issues to worry about as far as they're concerned. We have to change that. So this is what we got so far. There's not really that much of it. Afrolongevity is right there at the forefront. And excuse me, I keep flipping through these with the wrong buttons. You know, there's a transhumanist movement in Africa. I happen to be on the board of Humanity Plus, one of the oldest transhumanist movements. And I'm very gratified to see what's going on in transhumanism Africa. There's also, of course, Afro-longevity, sanos longevitas, as they say. Very inspiring. OC, thank you for sticking to it. Thank you for staying the course. And thank you for creating this wonderful thing, which we're all going to enjoy. Now, the research that's happening in Africa right now is largely drawing on African resources. The San, who live in the desert, use a cactus, which promotes health, and interestingly enough, it has weight loss components. Now, the San, being essentially hunter-gatherers, don't need a lot of weight loss drugs for the most part. But this Hoodia is showing great promise. There is also the Madagascar periwinkle, which is known indigenously, and people found that it has anti-cancer properties, which is very intriguing. Who knows where it's going to go? But I'll tell you one thing: Hoodia and the periwinkle are from Africa. They are out of Africa, and they should benefit Africa. These should not be whisked off to Switzerland or to America or even to Singapore to be made into things that benefits the Swiss or the Americans or the Singaporeans. This is Africa's. We should provide it to the world, but we should benefit from that, not just be left behind. This is the time. Another thing that we have looked for is very unusual: the Hadza, maybe the last true hunter-gatherers in the world. They live essentially the way they did 1,000 years ago, with only limited communication with the so-called modern world. They are demonstrating compounds that affect diet and metabolism, that slow aging and reduce inflammation. And within their rather limited territory in Tanzania, the former Tanganyika, they have a very diverse microbiome as well. We're just studying that to see how this can be improved. The Hadza diet is kind of in the hacker's mode right now, but it looks very encouraging. Now, there is research right now on the African microbiome, longevity research. There seems to be a higher microbial diversity within African communities, with links to immune function, metabolic health, and aging. Now, this is in the African gut. It's not something you can easily take out of Africa unless you're willing to ship people out of the country to go to research labs in Geneva, for example, or Zurich. Not likely to happen. It's got to happen in Africa, and people should to begin to pursue this to the extent that they aren't already. There are also global comparative longevity research studies. There's one run by a Harvard professor who I had lunch with a couple of years ago, deliciously named Immaculata da Vivo. Yes, that is her name. She goes by Mac. And she is examining a huge longitudinal research study about people 20, 30 years ago and aging in Africa. I encourage you to look her up. I spend more time on this, but we're sort of running out of time here. So forgive me if I keep plugging along with this. But it is an important study to understand how the genetic diversity, which is endemic to Africa, how diet and environment Social structures influence aging as well. The legal landscape. Of course, I leave this the last 15 minutes. Apologies. There are a few examples where Africa is trying to govern the longevity industry and other health products like this. A good, strong example is SAFRA, the South African Health Products Regulatory Agency. Quite a mouthful. I actually prefer Afrolongevity, but that's what they named themselves. And also, Rwanda has a good national ethics community, the RNEC. These are excellent starts, but they face a big problem. It's this 54 countries on a huge continent problem. That Africa has fragmented trial laws, fragmented laws on research, fragmented laws on everything. If there are laws at all, there really aren't all that many. We need to strengthen our biobanking and genomic data rules. They're there some places, but not all that often. Again, there's the fragmentation problem. We need a stronger, more cohesive system for our data rules and our biobanking. We also, and this is key, this is absolutely key, we need to strengthen our intellectual property rules, our benefit sharing protections. We cannot have a situation where people change a couple of genes and take something away from us, taking our intellectual property, taking our biodiversity, our microbiome knowledge, moving it out of the country without giving any benefits back to Africa. There are also very few laws specific to regenerative medicine or to any of the advanced therapies that we've been talking about. And that needs to change as well. And it's, again, very difficult because it's a big continent, 54 countries, and God knows how many cultures. What is it, 17 in Kenya alone? We need to step up. We need to start forming committees. We need to start forming organizations. And in fact, we need to look at what's happened and say, no, this isn't going to happen. We need to protect our data. We need to create informed consent before somebody can become a research subject. Should have put this in here. Yes, equitable benefit sharing. If you say, yes, you can take out a chunk of my liver and see whether or not the tissue can help people to live longer, happier lives, you should get some benefit from that. You're not just a volunteer, you are an important part of the process. Clinical trial harmonization, so that a clinical trial that takes place in Nigeria can be viewed with confidence by scientists anywhere on the continent, or really anywhere in the world. We need anti-biopiracy. That is important, very important. People come in and say, oh, look at this plant. The Hadza have been using it for generations to cure cancer. Let's just dig up a few and we'll take them and we'll grow them in wherever, the Thar Desert in Pakistan. And then we will be able to take this out of the hands of the Hadza and spread it out to some massive pharma company somewhere. And the Hadza don't really need the money anyway. They're hunter-gatherers. Why should they benefit? AI fairness, a big one. You need the technology to take advantage of AI. If you haven't got it, well, it's kind of hard to keep working. And then there's community inclusion. Ubuntu, again, back to the original concept. We take care of each other. Africa takes care of its own. Now, we ask ourselves, why do we have to create a longevity governance body, and why do we have to do it now? Well, those of you who have followed these talks before know that I am advocating and have advocated for a long time for a Pan-African longevity authority. What it will do is harmonize the laws across 54 countries so that everybody is playing by the same rules on the same level playing field. It will also signal Africa's ethical readiness. Africa is still perceived by a lot of countries in the world as, that kind of corrupt place underneath the Sahara where they don't even think about North Africa. That corrupt place in the continent where everybody's out for themselves and nobody cares about anybody else. That's not true. We know it's not true. And we should set up an organization that makes it clear to the world that that's not true. We need to protect data. We need to protect intellectual property. And we need to protect patient welfare, make sure that studies aren't created and run that actually do harm. I mean, we all know the story of American pharmaceutical companies dripping caustic products into the eyes of rabbits to see whether or not they cause damage. Well, we can't do that with longevity. We certainly can't do it with people, and absolutely we can't do it with Africans. So we need to make sure that this is all done. We need to encourage responsible biotech investment. We don't want investors out there who we don't want investors who are looking for things that, well, okay, for example, human cloning. Is that a good idea? Good question, that. The guy who cloned two people in China went to jail for it. But would that happen in Africa? Who knows? That's a question for the ethicists. We need to prevent unethical experimentation. And we need to align with the African Union's Agenda 2063, which would be the 100th anniversary of the African Union. Right now, the AU is not paying as much attention as they should to things like longevity research and longevity governance. Again, that leaves an opportunity. It leaves a hole. It leaves a gap. And that gap can be filled by a Pan-African Longevity Authority, properly created, properly organized, properly maintained. Now, people say, well, why not? Why us? What are we going to do? Simple, you do it. I've been involved with the longevity community for 20 years now. And when we got this started, nobody knew what they were doing. It was like the early days of the internet. Everything was possible because nothing was there. And we created this industry. Certainly not just me, but lots and lots of people who all believed the same things and agreed on the same goals and largely agreed on how to achieve those goals. And now there's an industry. But there's nothing like this in Africa. So we have to create one. Pan-African Longevity Authority. Think of it. You too could be a founding member. That would be loosely modeled on the EU and on the African Union, especially the Center for Disease Control. There would be divisions for clinical trials, divisions for biobanking and data, regenerative medicine regulation, AI and health oversight. You cannot imagine how valuable that is and how valuable it will be. Ethics and community, and God, yes, please, benefit sharing and protection of IP. We really need this, and we really need it soon, or somebody's going to snatch it away from us. The time is now. The time is right to do it. And the people to do it are you, all of us. This is an African movement. It has to be created. The Pan-African Longevity Authority should be created right now, just so it exists. Then you can fill in the spaces later. We're sort of counting on Afrolongevity to be at the forefront of this. Now, without good regulation, we get exploitation. With bad regulation, we wind up with stagnation. Everybody's out for themselves. With ethical regulation, we can create growth and we can create trust in a system because we created the system ourselves and we knew what it was meant to be. We knew how it was created. We knew where it came from. This is so important. We can use the lessons of other countries. We can take advantage of the speed demonstrated by the United States government, not so much in approving therapies, but in developing them. We can take advantage of the EU's structure, the Japanese models, hybrid models, which make everything work better. The Chinese, yes, boundaries. Boundaries are important, and the Chinese are very good at that. And then, of course, the UK's procedural rigor. This will create an organization that does what we need it to do. The guiding philosophy for the Pan-African Longevity Alliance is to create the kind of Africa we want, to quote the African Union, to create Africa's rules for Africa's future. Science must uplift the populations it studies. Yes, absolutely yes. We had a scientific subject named Henrietta Lacks in the United States who had essentially a mortal cell line, an immortal cell line, She never saw any benefit from it for 50 years. Finally, justice was done, and now her family is taking advantage of the HeLa cells. Not that they control them, but they're at least getting paid for the use of their grandmother's cell line. Fascinating. We need to be able to build local capacity. This is important because we're trying to develop Africa. We're trying to build a new industry. And we need benefit share. Going back to the Henrietta Lacks story again, you can't just take stuff from people, even if it's their hair or their toenail clippings or a cheek swab. You cannot take their bioinformation without compensating them properly. Now, individual consent is important in this regard. If you don't consent, they don't get your liver sample or your cheek swab or whatever. But if you are going to consent, you should be properly compensated for it. This should extend to the community as well. The community is going to allow things to happen. The whole community should receive a benefit from it. And this is a tough one. That African longevity technology cannot be used to benefit the world if the world will not use it to benefit Africans. Too much of that gone on. It's time to make sure that that stops. Now, this is a call to action. And I can't say this enough. We need to build something like a Pan-African Longevity Alliance. Africa has to stop being the subject of all of this, and we have to become the author. It's not going to happen overnight, but it will happen when people like you, all of you, get out there and start to do it. As Mahatma Gandhi once said, whatever you do may seem utterly insignificant, but it is of the utmost importance that you do it anyway. That is a call to action. We need to build ethical frameworks, not in reaction to crises, but in anticipation of them. We can't be sitting around like we were with nuclear power, atomic energy, or fossil fuels. And wow, look at this. What a crisis. What do we do now? We have to anticipate these things and build frameworks for the ethics and frameworks for the organization, frameworks for the operation of things before they exist. We can do that. Man's been looking to the future ever since we were out there in that cave. We can do this. And what we have to do is establish a Pan-African Longevity Alliance. Why? Well, all the benefits we've discussed, but most importantly, as a signal to the world that Africa is here, that Africa is ready, that we are going to be an important part of the world movement towards a happier, healthier, more equitable life for everybody on the planet. That's our job. I hope you can join us. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I want to thank a few people and organizations. Specifically, and most importantly, I need to thank my associate attorney, Brianna Azevedo, who has worked with me even before she was an attorney. It's been 7 or 8 years now, I think. Brianna is just spectacular, and she deserves, all the kudos and all the props that we can possibly give her. And then there's organizations to the right. I don't know what's going on with the screen here, but there is the Lifespan Research Institute, of which I am board chairman. There is Humanity Plus, of which I am a board member, and a couple of others, which should be on the screen. I can't quite see them, but I couldn't do this without any of them. So thank you so much. Looks like we have Chisomabia, if we could. You're
So
recognized, sir.
I think you can stop sharing now so that I can. Okay, it's back. I don't know if you can stop
Good.
sharing. Okay.
Okay.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm saying, can you stop sharing? Sorry.
You mean you want me to mute the audio?
No, I want you to stop sharing your screen so that I
Oh,
can have
I'm so sorry.
no issues. I understand.
How's that? Better?
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, for making out time. I always drag you from your discomfort to come talk to us. And I remember the last time that I reached out to you, you just finished your surgery, your hip surgery, and you had to just struggle and be there for me. Thank you so much for the sacrifices. Thank you so much for preserving my dreams and my vision and encouraging me to not give up. It means so much to me because at that time, I just came back to Nigeria and I'm struggling to, make ends meet, and I was kidnapped. And from there, a lot of people that was in my boat, they told me that, we have to leave. Your documents are not okay. And you asked me to send all my documents because I was scared. Being the fact that one of the lawyers said my documents got compromised. So thank you so much for standing by and helping me for the regularization of those documents and to ensuring that we are here today. Like I said, without encouragement, because I've decided to shut down TAFFD the next day before speaking to you. And today you've been there. I think you've attended all our in-person events. The ones that you didn't attend, you always give your support. You've done several shout outs for our events and all that. Thank you so much. And thank you for that wonderful presentation. You've in South Africa, you talked about the the call to action that you listed. You mentioned it in the last presentation. You mentioned the call to action. I think that's why I always encourage people to be part of this movement and to get involved, because it's not a one-man show. I always tell them, everyone, it's a collective responsibility. We need to come together to make these things happen. And without the commitment, Osinakachi cannot do these things alone. Sometimes I get overwhelmed. I'm a human being, and sometimes people complain you don't respond to messages and all that. A lot is happening behind the scene. You have to build yourself, you have to study, you have to keep maintain your relationship with people, you have to ensure that things keep happening, keep progressing, because we're going to make this thing a success. And I'm so excited that oftentimes most people reach out and they said, "Oh, we we want to seek your advice for A, B, C, D when it comes to longevity in Africa." So these are the things that we want to really establish, and in ensuring that we get these things right, we need more persons in the party so that we can make this happen. Thank you so much. I can thank you enough. I think it's time for the question. Chisom, if you're there, um, Chisom, you can ask your question. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Kalu. Good evening, Professor, right? I don't know if it's okay, law barrister.
Not officially a professor, and certainly not a doctor, but I'll take anything you want to give me in this regard. Sir will do just fine.
Yeah.
We have been overwhelmed with so many professionals coming in here. So sometimes you wouldn't even know when a person is filling in from a doctor to a professor. So pardon me. So I have a stage with world intellectual property. I had a course I did, general knowledge in intellectual property. That was should be last year or 2 years ago. And I noticed in your lecture where you mentioned IP and benefit sharing.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if, I wouldn't mind a bit more elaboration, maybe not in this class because you've done a lot already, and I know you probably have to go. But
It's a Sunday
because
afternoon. I've got time.
I don't know, because it might be boring, but I can just share. So when it comes to knowledge, traditional knowledge, that's TKI, that's, when it comes to longevity, Afrolongevity, and traditional knowledge and IP, there's a lot that I really want to, understand, which was not really covered fully, in this class, because when it comes to intellectual property and knowledge, there's traditional knowledge, there's a lot of conversation around that. I want to know how that spills into longevity. That's traditional knowledge spills into longevity, where everything intersects, because it's really important we know, we really get a grasp of it, so that, while people are trying to import, because I was talking to someone in the class who had his research, Mr. Osai, who has to recover his research from a university in Nigeria and then bring it into practice. We need to know, what he picked up from the local herbalists from the village, how that, the whole intersection of intellectual property with all of that, and how what needs to be patented, what needs to be, maybe trademarked, if there's anything like that. So these are really important conversations, so that people don't, be on the other side of the law when they are practicing or doing their research, and they need to know where, where the, when they cross the lines. I don't know if, that speaks to you. Thank you.
Oh,
Well done. Thank you.
thank you.
Class, I hope you're
Sorry.
better from the surgery.
Thank you. I'll be fine. It's just everybody has their
Okay,
has
sorry.
their issues. I'll be 70 years old in June, and if nothing's caught up with me yet, it's getting to be time. But anyway, thank you for your question, which is a broader question than just longevity. Intellectual property today is the most valuable thing in the world. I've had some arguments with some people over that, but really it is the most valuable thing we have right now. Knowledge, the so-called know-how, expertise, and data is the most valuable thing there is. And yet it is so easy to lose track of it, to lose control of it, sometimes even to forget that what you've got is valuable. I'll give you an example. There was a plant that the ancient Romans used to induce abortion. It was birth control. It was known as Silphium, Sylphium. You can look it up. And it was so popular in Rome during the Empire, and maybe during the Republic. It was so popular that they basically eradicated it to sell it to people that wanted birth control. Now, that sounds like a tragedy, but it appears that somebody somewhere in Turkey may have found one last existing patch of Silphium. Nobody's quite sure yet, because they thought it went extinct 2,000 years ago. But let's say that you were sitting there in the mountains in Turkey, and you just happened to mention over a cup of tea with somebody that you found a quarter of a hectare where there seems to be Silphium growing, and you'd certainly like to take it to a botanist and determine where, what this is. And somebody says, really, where is this hillside? And you say, oh, just out the way, here. And then all of a sudden, this guy goes to a pharmaceutical company, and the next thing you know, there's a helicopter flying over that quarter hectare of potential Silphium, and somebody's quietly out there buying the land. And the next thing you know, they've got a new birth control drug that's organic, that's biologically based, that's as good as it ever was, is the sort of thing that the Romans would eradicate out of demand. And the poor guy who's sitting there at the tea shop is wondering what happened because he forgot that this was so valuable, could be so valuable. Everybody thinks of intellectual property. They think of computer programs. They think of, chemical formulas to cure cancer or to prohibit dementia from occurring. Intellectual property is whatever it is that is valuable in and of itself. People think that thieves steal things. No, thieves today steal ideas. And if Africa's ideas, Africa's knowledge is stolen again, then what's the point of all this? We have to protect our IP in the same way that you would protect your pocketbook or your land or your house or your children, because it is so valuable. It is just so important that we do this. Now, to the extent that there are laws, we need to invoke those laws. We need to make sure people understand that that little patch of shrub in the back of the tea house might be of value and that they should be entitled to benefit from it, entitled to profit from it, and entitled to protection for it. Right now, we don't really have that kind of framework in Africa, and I think we need it because IP really is the most valuable thing there is right now. We'll leave aside metaphysics like love and all that, but in terms of business, in terms of finance, IP is where it's at. Does that help? Hello?
Sorry, I also, if I may, I think
Please.
it's either her network, because Chisholm, it's a very intentional person when it comes to learnership, but she was not in the class when you explained this thing. She came because your explanation always come in from the universal to the particular. You move from the top bottom, and during that time she got disconnected when you explain it from the broader spectrum. She came in when you were just trying to summarize the intellectual property aspect of it. So that's why
The most
she,
profound thing I've said all day, and she missed it.
yeah, she missed it, network or whatever. Um,
Fortunately,
any
there's
other,
a video, I hope.
yeah, just
Good.
it's recorded. Um, any other questions?
Doesn't sound like it.
Okay, I think there are, okay, someone is asking,
Yes.
what should the non-expert be doing to move us closer to the proposed Pan-African Longevity Alliance?
Well, you don't have to be an expert to join a movement. In fact, most movements are not made up of heroes. Maybe there's a few at the front. Most movements are made up of people who believe. They are made up of people with enough intelligence to see the importance of what it is that they are being asked to do. Now, some people may not have that intelligence. They're herding goats in the mountains somewhere. But most people do. And, I've made this call to action several times now because I just don't think that this old white guy from California should be the hero at the front of the Pan African Longevity Alliance. It just doesn't make sense. This is something that Africans should do for Africa. But I can certainly suggest that that's the right way to go, in my opinion. If somebody thinks I'm mad, well, let them click leave and leave the conversation. I think there are plenty of people that think this is a good thing. OC with the Afrolongevity movement has done a fine job of coalescing people. I think that what we need to do now, and forgive the we again, I'm only African in spirit, but certainly not in origin. We could just create the damn thing, establish a board of directors. I'd be happy to serve on a board like that. I know plenty of other people who would too. Establish it and then build it in. And yeah, maybe someday the African Union will say, we like what you're doing. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Rather than create our own longevity alliance or Pan-African longevity alliance, why don't you just join the African Union? You can be our longevity division. That would be wonderful. It's kind of like having a startup company be bought out, but somebody's got to start up the company. And what I would like to see personally is an organization to be created, board of directors established. If it's a nonprofit, that you start taking donations on a nonprofit basis. If it's a for-profit foundation, I'll start taking some donations. There must somewhere be some wealthy Africans who would like to put their money up against it. I happen to know one, but doesn't seem interested right now. You might be interested, though, if there were actually an organization out there that was working towards this goal. So you set it up just like an old movie, which we had in the United States called Field of Dreams, where a guy is obsessed with building a baseball diamond in his cornfield in the middle of nowhere. And his wife is saying, you can't just cut down the cornfield and build a baseball diamond. What good is it? And he hears this voice whispering in the back of his head saying, if you build it, they will come. And that's what we need to do with the Pan-African Longevity, or call it what you want, but what we need to do with Pan-African Longevity Alliance is build it. And if we build it, it will grow. You cannot tell from a seed in the ground, one little leaf coming up, what kind of a massive tree it will become, or if it will live to be a tree at all. But it is so important that you plant that seed. You have to start. And that's where we are. That's why I keep coming up with the same exhortation, the same call to action. It's because somebody's got to do it. And we want the right people to do it. And I think we're the right people.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just a step at a time. This year, when we started Afrolongevity, we launched the International Longevity Alliance. And this year, in 2022, TAFFD launched Afrolongevity. 2023, Afrolongevity launched the International Longevity Summit Africa. This year, we'll be launching in Limpopo, the Longevity Forum, now, and I'm looking out for what we've discussed because I'm setting up the documents to ensure that I have the right people. And the most important thing is that with the movement, with the educational movement, we have people from Kenya, people from different African countries participating, so that when we establish this chapter, it will be easier for us to get people from different countries to be part of the whole formation. And the formative state, it gives people, if we form it very well, it will give people sense of belonging to understand that, oh, it is something that I am part of, a founding member and all that. So, so that's why my strategy seems to be teleological. I just want to get as many persons who are willing and ready as possible, so as to get it. So most persons are willing, but they are not ready. For instance, this program, we have over 800 persons that indicated interest and they joined the group. But you see the participation fluctuate between 60 to 80, 90, 100, daily. So you see that dealings, and some persons are exiting and all that. They thought that it's just as easier as being said. They don't understand the commitment, the level of commitment, the level of sacrifices that is needed. Because if you want to make a change, you need to put in the work. You need to be available to do the work. So if you want to be a hero, extraordinary people are not people that live just ordinarily. They just do the little thing. They add a little thing to the ordinary. That is what makes it extra to the ordinary. So you just have to put an extra effort, and then you change the narrative. So that is the case, and which is why we're moving from nations to nations, and then trying to situate these things and get the right persons involved. In this chapter, in the last chapter, we got lawyers being part of the program, and it's a whole lot of plus to us, because when you have advocates in what you're doing, it gives you an edge, especially in Africa. We have also healthcare professionals. And for me, this is the best time to really set these things up. You know, when chapters start moving, doing programs, campuses start doing things, and you start populating the sites and the socials, and and you start touching life, you know, doing practical things that matters, then people would want to people want to be part of those things that you're doing. It's not just all about theorizing, but when you start doing real community work, you know, outreach programs, because what I have realized is that in Africa, the most difficult thing is transfer of knowledge. Transfer of knowledge is a problem in Africa, and most idea is open sourced. So, but we just need to have people that can help us do this work, as we are also doing. It's not a one-man show. I've said it before. So, thank you so much, Paul. I don't think I don't know if we still have any other question here. I'm checking the chat box. No longevity in Africa. To this moment, okay. There is no other question. Okay. Question concerning the data sovereignty you talked about. Someone is asking concerning the data sovereignty you talked about. How do we protect our data, knowing how easy it is now for most developed systems can mine and harvest data, especially from Africa? What system can we put in place? Someone is asking.
Yes, the problem is not a small one, and there's no easy answer to it. It begins with vigilance, with understanding that if you're not careful, you could get robbed. You wouldn't, for example, want to leave your wallet on a park bench, or leave it hanging out of your back pocket in a crowded area, because you know that there's risks. So you take action to reduce the risk. You can password protect things, you can encrypt them, you can make sure that there's only a limited amount of access to what you have. But data security is really kind of out of my league. There are entire industries now that exist to protect data and to make sure it's not stolen. But then, how many of us do not know somebody whose data was hacked, or whose laptop was not stolen, or something? Data security is hard. And I don't know that there's an easy answer for it, but if you don't address it, if you don't at least become aware of the risks, you are much more at risk of being hacked, of having your data stolen. I wish I could provide a better answer for that. We live in a world where intellectual property is vastly valuable, and there's a whole class of people out there trying to take it away from you, whatever it might be, you know? I wish I could do better for that.
Meantime, I think the best way of starting property rights foundation and framing, the best way of doing that is by starting. So you can't just keep conceptualizing and theorizing things. You start getting things right by doing them. So there should be a framework. There should be a translatable model. and it should be done. There is no perfect idea. No idea is the standard or the ideal. Idea is always progression and tend towards perfection, because the originators are not perfect. We are humans. So
That's right.
yeah, we get better by doing it. So reframing, reshaping, and then I'm looking at variables that affect those same principles and ideas, initiative, as the case may be. So thank you so much. I think we have to call it a day here. And thank you so much, um, Paul, for making out time to be here. I can't thank you enough. I also thank our community, everyone who made it possible to be here, especially our community leader here, Suliet. She's doing an amazing work. And then I recognize also the presence of our head of community in South Africa. She's here. Neti, she's here. And then all our social media managers and team members. I think we are growing fast and we are doing something that is meaningful in the eyes of people who are intentional about life. Thank you so much again. Good night, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining.
Thank you. It is always a pleasure to speak to you guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.